Are we going?
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's live stream. We're excited to have you here as we dive into an important topic, managing invasive species and nuisance weeds. These plants can cause serious problems in our landscape, but with the right techniques, they're absolutely manageable. In just a moment, Kathy will introduce our speaker, Keith Sykora, founder of Stellar Native Plant Nursery. He'll be sharing practical strategies for identifying, controlling, and preventing invasive plants. Stick around until the end, and we'll have a live Q&A session, so drop your questions in the chat. Let's get started.
Hi, everybody. This is Kathy. Thank you for joining us. We are thrilled to have our special guest here with us tonight. I do want to start off just by mentioning that Sag Moraine promotes the avoidance of using chemicals, herbicides in your landscape. I myself, I have a smaller urban suburban landscape. I don't use chemicals. I pull the weeds or use vinegar in the cracks and so on and so forth. And a lot of our viewers and subscribers have smaller urban suburban yards that just kind of have more nuisance weeds that pop up that can be managed. And so we certainly recommend to avoid chemicals in your smaller landscape. However, a number of our viewers and subscribers have much larger landscapes, maybe several acres, that they want to restore. And when you have land that size, it is more of a restoration project. And a lot of those very large acreage yards they may have a wooded or natural area on them, or they may back up to a wooded natural area. And unfortunately, our wooded natural areas are pretty much just loaded with invasive species that have snuffed out most of our native species. And in those situations where you have big land with massive amounts of invasive species, that's not something you're going to be able to do solely with the pulling method or plastic or vinegar or whatever you're going to do. That's more of a restoration, and that's probably going to take some proper chemical use, but we want to be sure we're using the right chemical at the right time in the right way, and that's what Keith is going to really be helping us with tonight. So whether you're a smaller landowner, a more typical suburban urban yard, Keith is going to have some information for you on there and keeping irritating weeds at bay. But if you have large property, large acreage, and you're going to do more of a restoration of all or part of your property, that's really Keith's specialty. So we're thrilled to have him here. Before I introduce Keith, though, I want to ask you to please like this video. It really helps out our channel. And please subscribe so that you get notification whenever we come out with new content. With that, I will introduce our special guest this evening. Keith Sykora is the founder of Stellar Native Plant Nursery, which was established in 2022. With over a decade of experience in the ecological restoration industry, Keith has held diverse roles, including field technician, crew foreman, field superintendent, and project manager. His career has allowed him to contribute to award-winning natural area projects across Chicagoland, southern Wisconsin, northwest Indiana, and southwest Michigan. Keith has worked with a broad range of clients, including forest preserve districts, municipalities, private landowners, homeowners associations, corporations, commercial properties, and conservation groups. His extensive field experience gives him a deep understanding of how to execute successful restoration projects and select the perfect native plants for every situation. In 2018, Keith also began growing native plants at home from seed as a hobby, refining his expertise with each passing season. By 2022, he was selling his plants to the public at farmers markets in Chicago's western suburbs, sharing his passion for native plants with the community. A self-described extrovert, Keith loves engaging with people educating them about the ecological benefits of native plants and sharing his wealth of knowledge accumulated over the past decade. Everybody, please welcome Keith Sykora. Hello, Keith.
Hey, hi Kathy, hi Lexi. Yeah, thanks again for having me. I'm looking forward to sharing my expertise with people, and hopefully I can kind of, you know, really teach people how, the full scope of stewardship, and that, there's many tools in the toolbox. Like you mentioned, herbicide, that is one powerful tool, but it needs to be used in the appropriate time and the appropriate way. So we're going to talk about all the different tools at your disposal, doing stewardship, and just kind of, and I want to take you on a journey of my thought process when I go and I first look at a client's property, and kind of how we decide to proceed with the stewardship work. So that being said, yeah, we'll get started here. And go. Yeah. So this first slide, stewardship is a thinking man's game. That's a quote that my boss said to me 13 years ago when I was starting out in this industry. I like that quote just because it really, it rings true. There's not a one size fits all approach to doing stewardship. It's more about, you have to get out there and look at the site, and you have to respond to what's going, and you have to kind of outthink the plants that you're trying to manage. A good example would be when you're a good example would be if, say, earlier in the season you get out there and you start encountering reed canary grass and buckthorn at the same time, right? Say it's May and it's springtime. The reed canary grass is going to be the bigger priority because it's a cool season grass. It's going to flower at the end of May, early June, and set seed by the 4th of July. Whereas buckthorn, you can kind of control all year long. You could even control that in the wintertime. So that's just kind of an example, and I'm going to kind of with the slides. But yeah, stewardship, really, that is the first step, is scouting. So when I get out to a client's property, I go through and I walk through the natural area, and I have my clipboard with me, and I'm making a list. I'm making a list of all the different weeds and invasive species that I see on the site. And considering the time of year, kind of like what I just talked about, that's actually what's going to really determine your highest priority on that visit. Because with stewardship, it's always kind of a race against time. What you're trying to prevent, especially with these invasive species, is them completing their life cycle and seeding out. So typically in our area, you have a lot of cool season weeds that emerge early in the spring. And your goal is to really get those under control before the beginning of the middle of summer, because that's when they're going to be seeding out and then spreading and making your life a lot harder the following season. So when I'm doing this visit, these are the kind of things that I'm thinking about as I'm encountering the weeds and invasive species on the property. What kind are they? Are they grasses? Are they broadleafs, woody vines? That's going to kind of determine maybe, what kind of approach I'm going to be taking. So we do have, say, like the reed canary grass, like I mentioned, there are grass-specific herbicides that we can use to control those. And same with broadleaf weeds. There's broadleaf-specific herbicides that can control broadleaf weeds without affecting the native grasses. And then the life cycle, if it's an annual, biennial, or perennial. In general, annual weeds, we're not going to use any herbicides on them because they're annual. The plan with an annual weeds, something like ragweed or foxtail grass, we're just trying to eliminate it from producing more seed. So when we encounter those on a client's property, our goal is to, get out like a brush cutter or machete and just kind of cut those things down and get to them early in the season so they don't they don't mature, set seed, and then have more annuals next year. And a lot of biennials, it's kind of a similar approach where you're just trying, when they flower, they're usually flowering in their second year. And you're trying to prevent them from setting out more seed. Sweet clover is a great example of that. That's something that expends a lot of its energy on blooming, and then you cut it down and it's wiped out for the year. So really, when we're talking about herbicides, and we're going to talk more about that later on, we're really targeting perennial weeds, and really the worst invasive ones of the perennials is that we're going at. There are a few biennials that still require a little bit of herbicide if they're really taking hold, and we'll talk about those as well. And then, yeah, what stage of the life cycle the species are in, that's going to determine how I'm going to attack the site as well.
Can I just ask a question, Keith?
Yes.
What is Phragmites? Is that a biennial or is that a perennial?
That is a perennial. So that's a perennial grass that's invasive. That's actually a warm season grass. So it completes its life cycle kind of at the end of the summer, not in like the middle. But as you've seen, that is a perennial. It's nothing when they take hold and they start their colony, they don't let anything else grow in that space that they occupy when they get really thick.
We also have some comments on chat. It sounds like two attendees have problems with Japanese stilt grass, and that they're a real pain for them.
Yeah, so stilt grass, that's a real tough one. That is a perennial as well, and that's something that you'd have to consider probably using like a grass specific herbicide on. And we can talk, yeah, we'll talk more about some of that stuff too. But that's a good example of something that's perennial and that causes that use, or that having to use that tool in the toolbox. Where if it was an annual grass like foxtail grass, you're just going to cut it down. You're going to mow it, and you're just going to try to avoid it from setting seed. Some other factors when I'm scouting out an area is what's the proximity of the species to the desirable vegetation. Is it a big monoculture like the Phragmites, like Kathy was saying, or are they mixed in with all my good stuff? Because that's going to drastically change how I'm going to approach that. If it's a big monoculture, then I can kind of just, I could probably get away with foliar spraying the whole thing down and killing it, and then kind of restarting that clock over. But if it's mixed in, I'm going to have to use very careful application methods. So I'm not having any collateral damage to the vegetation around it. Another consideration is if the invasive species are in a wet area. There are herbicides that are allowed and that are aquatic approved. And those are the ones you're going to have to use. Even if you're in an area that's just adjacent to a wet area or could get wet, like in a flood, then you're going to have to use those applied herbicides in there as well. And then plant family, where I'm going with that is certain plant families that can determine your approach. A good example is the pea family. Things like sweet clover and red clover, and the pea family responds to fire in a way where it actually increases its growth. So so sometimes prescribed burning isn't always the best. If you have a problem with sweet clover, you're going to actually get more after a prescribed burn. So that comes into play too with some of our techniques in stewardship. So I kind of talked about things that are, when I'm walking a property, the things that are influencing my decisions, what I'm looking for. Now I'm going to kind of talk about some of the tools that I use and other professionals like me use in this industry. So we're going to talk about some of the mechanical things that you can do. There's hand pulling, there's selective mowing with a brush cutter, machete. Non-selective mowing, that's when you're using a lawnmower. Seed collecting, we'll take hand pruner sometimes and we'll collect the seed of the invasive species. There's mechanical cutting with like heavy equipment. There's tree pullers, and then like chainsaw work for trees and things like that. So I got slides for all these, and we'll go through those as well. And then with herbicides, there's different ways to apply herbicides. You can foliar spray, which is just spraying the plant. Broadcast spraying is when you're treating a very large area, you might use a boom sprayer, or nowadays we're using drones. Hand-wicking is a technique of just kind of like applying the herbicide to the individual species in a wicking manner. And then Basal oil, I'll talk about that too. That's applying it to woodies. Cultural control. So the concept that I want to get across too is, say you have invasive species that have really taken hold of an area, and you do have to go in there and use some herbicide. It's good for you to go in after they've been under control. There needs to be a plan in place of how you're going to replace that. So putting in more native plants, whether it's seed or live plants, is something that you should be considering. Because like after you remove some of these really bad invasive perennial weeds, what's going to happen is you're going to start getting annual weeds that move in. So you're going to get more weeds to kind of replace it. But the annual weeds, we can manage those through mowing methods and things. And so we get the natives established. It's a lot easier to get the natives established and kind of push those types of weeds out. If that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to kind of go through some of these tools that I was talking about. And hand pulling is just, it's an effective thing to do for certain species. Garlic mustard is probably the first that comes to mind. It's when it's in flower and you grab it by the base of the stem, it pulls out of the ground pretty easily, and you get the entire root system with it. So in April, when garlic mustard is really having its time, that's one of the most common things that we do. So even on a large site, we'll walk through and we'll start collecting and hand pulling the garlic mustard. It's not something that you really would treat with herbicide.
Keith, isn't that something you could actually eat too? Garlic mustard?
You could, yeah, and it does have that garlic aroma. Yeah, I don't mind the smell actually when I'm pulling it. Yeah, but yes, you could.
Make a pesto.
Yeah, some pesto. If you look at the photo, there's some you can see the little seed, like the little seed pods. They're called saliques on the garlic mustard. Those, if you don't pull garlic mustard, and those eventually, they ripen and then they burst, they put out, thousands of seeds. So it's important to get that off your property. Yeah.
It's amazing how fast it grows too. You can look out there one day and you see like little 2-inch plants, and then you get a good rain or something, and all of a sudden, boom, it's like you have a carpet. I mean, it's like amazing how fast this stuff grows in the spring.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into what I was saying about timing, right? You want to take care of the most pressing issue at the time of that visit. And so in April or May, garlic mustard, you really want to get a handle on, because the window is so short for that species.
I have to ask here because it's on the slide. You have a lot of people out there that are big fans of Queen Anne's lace. Queen Anne's lace is not a native species. Do you consider it to be kind of invasive, or can they leave it if they like it, or what's your opinion on Queen Anne's lace?
It's not an invasive, it's a weed, right? Is how I handle it. So I control it as a weed. If people really like it, they could leave it. But it's
Will it
really
snuff out other things though? I mean, it may only be a weed, but will it get kind of out of control to
It
kind of take
can.
over?
Well, where I find it the most nuisance is, say we have a new restoration project that's maybe on its second year. So something like where we did a prairie from scratch, like we reseeded it, and it's coming up. That first year, you kind of keep things mowed to kind of keep stuff like that from flowering, setting seed. But really, in that second year, when you're really letting the natives come in, Queen Anne's it's just a really good weed at filling in spaces. And it can be a real challenge if it's got a good seed bank in there. You'll get them just really kind of choking out your natives. And so it's good to get those out of the way and give space to them. When you have an established prairie, it seems to be pretty well kept in check by the natives once it's well established. Mhm. Yeah, and then a few of these other ones on the list. Curly dock is a perennial, and we're gonna talk about that one too. But that's one that you can pull out and it has a taproot that looks like a carrot, just like Queen Anne's lace. And you can usually yank that out of the ground and control it that way. And then ragweed and giant and common, those are both annual. Same with velvet leaf. Yellow rockets in the mustard family, it's a biennial. Pulls out of the ground. So a lot of the mustards you can things in the mustard family you can control this way too. And yeah, selective mowing. So that's Ellie who works with me, running a brush cutter. We use that tool a lot in restoration. It is very handy tool to get in there. You get pretty precise at using it over time, and you can kind of squeeze in between the natives. You can cut the ragweed down, and you can cut the Queen Anne's lace and the foxtail and sweet clover, like I mentioned. It's great for targeting sweet clover because, like I said, if you wait till sweet clover is in flower and then you hit that right at the base, it's wiped out. You don't have to worry about that plant anymore.
Is
Non-selective.
sweet clover the one with the white flowers, or what is is that the regular clover we see with the white flowers?
It gets really tall. I've got a slide on it,
Oh,
but
okay.
there's two types. There is a white and a yellow, but it gets pretty tall. It gets like 3 feet tall when it's in flower.
So is sweet clover the one with the yellow?
Yes, but there's also a sweet clover with white flowers too.
Okay, because if that's what I have, and if you tell me I don't have to get the roots out, then I'm very happy.
Yeah, if you let it flower and then hack it right at the stem, it should wipe.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm. Non-selective mowing, that's just your typical mowing. Again, like I said, we use that mostly on a new restoration site. And we're just what you're trying to do with that is you mow the prairie high that first year. And what that does is it keeps all the weeds that are coming up, like the annual weeds, like foxtail grass and ragweed and those kind of things. When you knock them down, so you keep them from putting out seed, and then it also gives more sunlight to your seedlings that are growing, that are slow. I have used it where I've had instances where sweet clover in particular has really taken hold on a natural area, and we've gone through and we've mowed it down. And you'd be surprised how well it wipes all that sweet clover out, and then the prairie comes back, and it does really, really well. It kind of resets the clocks. You're going to have like the mini prairie that year, but it's very effective at controlling sweet clover. So that's why I have it on here. Seed collecting. You can see that's a reed canary grass seed head in that person's hand. But this is kind of like your last resort. This is say it's end of June and you missed the window on reed canary grass, like you weren't able to treat it with herbicides earlier, or mow it down so that way it wouldn't set seed. Then you're out there collecting seeds. And we do that most often with just, using a pair of hand pruners, cutting off the tops, putting them in a garbage bag and disposing it off site. But it's a tool, and it's something that we definitely use quite a bit.
So is that reed canary grass, is that an annual?
That's a perennial. And
that is a perennial. So it will still come back next year, even if you take those seed heads off. But maybe next year you can get at it with a better method.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like if you missed the boat and you weren't able to treat it early in the season, because when it goes to seed like that, the plant has it started its senescence, and what that means is it's shut down for the year. So it sets seeds and then it kind of goes dormant, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
And when it's dormant, you can't do anything with herbicides, or you can't, it's not going to be effective. The plant's not going to take it in. Reed canary grass is kind of interesting that it's a cool season grass and it's perennial, but it actually does green back up in the fall. So it's interesting. It comes on really heavy in the spring, and then it flowers and then goes to seed in the middle of the summer. Kind of dies back or, goes dormant for the rest of the summer. And then in the fall, it does start to green back up again. It doesn't always flower in the fall if you were to leave it alone, but it does green back up enough where you could actually get another chance to control it. So we typically do control canary grass twice in a season. And then manual
And when
clearing.
you say control it, because the key is that you need green foliage for the herbicides to work?
Correct. Yeah, the plants need to be actively growing to take that in. And so
Okay.
that's where the timing of the seasons really comes into play is, if they're already in flower and about to go to seed, you're probably too late at that point. And that's why we'll collect seed a lot of times. Mm-hmm.
Is that the way it is with all plants, that it's when they're actively growing foliage that is the best time to hit them with an herbicide?
It is, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And a lot of the biennial species, the first year they form what's called a rosette, and that's just kind of like the basal leaves at the base of it. And so they don't flower that first year, but they have that nice big rosette. That's a great time to spray them, is in that first year. But you can still treat them the second year, but you just don't want to wait till they're you don't want to wait till they're at full mature height and already already blooming and about ready to go to seed. Then you're kind of late at that point. So manual clearing, that's using a chainsaw or brush cutter to cut down an invasive tree. This is very labor intensive type of work. This is what we do with buckthorn and all of our invasive trees. What I wanted to point out here is it's important with all deciduous trees that if you cut them down and you don't treat the stump with herbicide, it's going to grow back. And then even when you do treat the stumps with herbicide, a lot of times you still will get some resprouts and you'll have to kind of retreat those again later in the year. It opens up the canopy, and a lot of using buckthorn as an example, you'll get a lot more like first year seedlings that are in the seed bank that now have more sunlight and are kind of breathing. So if you're taking out a large grove of buckthorn or an invasive shrub like honeysuckle, be prepared to have to go back through there with herbicide and treat the resprouts the following year.
Now, Keith, I just got buckthorn out a week ago,
Mhm.
and they ground the stumps up. So is that enough, or are we going to have to, are you going to have to come in and do some more work for me to take out the little things coming up?
So yeah, so grinding the stumps is great. So those actual trees themselves probably won't resprout because they ground them up, which is great. But now that you've opened up that area, I'm anticipating there's going to be little buckthorn seedlings that are be coming through there, and we're gonna, that are now now that the big guys are out of the way and kind of giving them space, they're going to start coming up. So yes, the answer is yes. You're going to probably need some retreatment this year. And we'll kind of talk about some of the other methods to do that so we can do it the most, safe way possible. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Using a tree puller. This is a tool that's very handy. And I got this nice little video that I wanted to play. And this is a great way to get rid of things that are about 3 inches in diameter or smaller. So here, go ahead. We'll kind of play this for everybody.
We're there. Pro XL 321 tutorial. And you see this is a Scotch broom plant, and it's multiple stems coming off one small stem down here. Now, when you're pulling these small ones with this monster, this will pull up to a 3-inch tree, but it'll also pull these tiny ones. But there's a secret to these tiny ones is we weld the word step right on the tool, right there. And why we do that is we want you to step on the jaw when you place it around these small saplings. The reason you do that is because you want it to start pulling the plant straight out of the ground instead of bending it over, which possibly would cause it to break. So when you're coming up to these small stems, and actually we recommend that you actually step on it for every size, so you can grab every stem right next to the ground. And this is the only tree puller that actually has this feature that actually goes right to the ground. So step on it where it says step, close the jaw around that little stem, and you'll see it'll pull it up and not break it off. It's not a bad size clump of roots for that tiny little plant. So you can see the advantage of stepping on it. You step on it, press this right against the ground, so there's no space between where it comes out of the ground and where it's grabbing onto the stem. And you'll get a pull. It'll be a pulling motion up before it starts bending it over. If you pull it up too high on the stem, like if you pull it up too high on the stem, up in this area, it starts to bend the plant over. And then of course, there's gonna be a lot of stress there and it could possibly break off. So again, we weld it right on the handle, or right on the jaw, sorry. Step there, set it into the flesh of the plant and pull away. Happy pulling. Thanks for coming by.
So yeah, that's a great video. And like Kathy said, we were watching that earlier. It's very satisfying to see that that woody species come out of the ground. And what's great about that is you won't have to use any herbicides as well. So
It's
you
kind of like when you're pulling a dandelion and you really hear that pop and you get the full root. Imagine how that feels on a 3-inch buckthorn.
yeah. Yeah, and I have a customer who cleared quite a bit of his property using that, you know, getting the buckthorn out that way, and it's worked out well for him. So, and that's a nice, you know, non-chemical, you know, approach to getting rid of some of these invasive trees. So. And then going on to some more of the mechanical type tools out there. There's brush mowing with heavy duty equipment. This here is a skid steer that has a brush mower head on there, and that thing spins, and it's almost like a pencil sharpener. It's pretty impressive. So you can actually use that to kind of hit the tree, and then it breaks it off, kind of knocks down the trunk of it, and then it kind of sucks it up, and then it shreds it, and it spits out the wood chips all over the ground. So you really are only going to use this if you've got, say, like just a thick grove of invasive trees and shrubs. You can use this to mash all that stuff up. The problem is, you know, it basically turns it into just like a floor of wood chips. And those wood chips, they do break down pretty quick. Within a year or so, they're gone. But you are going to have to go back and do some herbiciding afterwards, because you're not really herbiciding the stumps because they're all shredded and everything's just kind of a mess. So just plan, if you go this route, you're going to have to do a lot of follow-up herbicide work. A lot of forest preserves will do this if there's like an area along a road or something, or even right of ways. You see this a lot now. So it's a tool. It's that one machine and person can do the work of, you know, 20 people out there cutting with chainsaws and all that stuff. And it's nice because you don't have to, it's, you know, as opposed to manual cutting, if you cut all that stuff down, then you either have to burn all those cut trees, or you gotta chip them up and then haul off the chips and dump them. And so it's, you know, it has its place in the, you know, for certain jobs. What's important is you use this a lot in the wintertime when the ground is frozen, so you don't compact the soil. You can use it in the summertime if you've got the tracks on the skid steer that don't really compact. But it's got to be dry conditions. If you drove this out on wet soil, then you're going to compact the soil and you're going to have a lot of problems later on. So, you know, it's a heavy duty piece of equipment. Okay, so I kind of talked about the mechanical tools in the stewardship tool shed. Now I'm going to talk about herbicides. Okay. Some special considerations when you're about to use them. Professional applicators like me should be licensed by the state. It's a license you have to get through the Department of Agriculture. So anybody who's applying, like if you hire somebody to apply herbicides on your property, they should be licensed. You always have to read the label on your herbicides before using them. and you have to use them in a way that's intended on the label. So an example would be, like I already talked about, aquatic, you can only use aquatic approved herbicides in areas near water. You can only stay within the rates that they tell you to. Everything's got to be done by the way it's described on the label. Try to use herbicides only when necessary. And like I mentioned, mainly on perennial invasive species is where we're going to use those. In general, annual weeds can be managed mechanically, and same with a lot of biennial weeds. Try to use selective herbicides. So I talked about that earlier. There's broadleaf herbicides that work just on broadleafs. So they're not going to affect the grasses, and then vice versa. There's grass-specific herbicides that work that aren't going to affect the forbs. An example I have is I had a customer last year in Palatine where his backyard, he's got a lot of great natives that are kind of late summer bloomers. He's got a lot of like Joe Pye weed and Rebecca and that kind of stuff. But the turf grass had gotten really bad in his beds there. So he hired me, and I sprayed the turf grass early in the spring with a grass-specific herbicide and killed that off, and kind of gave room to his forbs and like really let them come in and fill in the space. So that's an example of using something selective for a specific situation. You always want to apply herbicides in as careful of a manner as possible. You want to avoid off-target damage as much as possible. And then we talked about this earlier, that you want to apply them when the plant is actively growing. Like we said, when they're green and they're growing, it's early in their life cycle. You don't want to do it when it's late in their life cycle and they're about to call it quits for the year. At that point, you've kind of missed the boat. So, and then, remember, herbicides are only a tool. They are not the only way to control invasive species. And that's just good. That's just, being a good steward if you just use it when appropriate.
Now, if you're doing buckthorn and you're actually going and you're cutting the tree down, but then you're treating the stump, that's okay to do anytime, like you said, right?
Yeah, you could do that in the winter. You could do it, all year round.
Honeysuckle, the same, invasive honey, any of the woodies are fine to do any time of the year, right?
Yes. So that's why I was kind of saying in that early example of, say it's May and you've got buckthorn and you got reed canary grass. It's more important to get that reed canary grass when you're there, because you could do buckthorn later in the summer and, come back to it. Ideally you take care of everything, right? You cut down the buckthorn, get the stumps treated. You treat the reed canary grass, you take care of any other annual weeds you see and get it all in one visit. But like, that's what I was saying is when you're kind of playing chess with these larger sites, sometimes you got to just go after that one really bad bully early on or at the right time. So foliar treating herbicides, that's just that's basically spraying weeds. We use backpack sprayers a lot in our industry. You can be very careful with them, which is great. You can go at a low, we use ones with hand pumps on them, so you can go at a real low pressure. A lot of the forbs that we treat, or these rosettes I was telling you about, they have nice broad leaves where you can kind of just shoot a little bit of herbicide in the center and that's enough to kill them. So that's one application method for herbicides. Boom spraying, okay, this is only going to be done if you're going after a large monoculture, right? So a big patch of Phragmites, or say you're gonna redo an area say it's turf grass, it's an old golf course that they're gonna turn to a prairie. They're gonna go through and you might boom spray that turf grass off, kill it, and then you're gonna go reseed it with a native seed mix. And I talked about drones, those are becoming more popular now. They're starting to use those to treat some of these large, Phragmites patches and cattails. It's pretty interesting technology. And so that's another application for them.
Can I ask you, Keith, so the average person though, that you see spraying herbicide,
Mm-hmm.
they're out there with they don't have the thing on the backpack like you had with they're out there with whatever kind of container they got at Home Depot.
Yeah.
And what is your, like, and we want to be sure that there's as little collateral damage to the environment as possible. Do you have any tips on that? Or do you, if a homeowner is doing this on their own?
Yeah, so it's very common, especially because we'll work on sensitive sites where it's they're very high quality, so you're just targeting some a few invasive species and you're surrounded by all good plants. It's very common to put sponges on the end of the nozzle, and even carry a bucket with you and kind of keep the nozzle in that bucket, and then you can basically sponge the herbicide onto the invasive. That's a way of doing it. Um,
So
you
you
know,
put a sponge on the end of the nozzle.
yes. Hmm.
Any sponge? I mean, how does it stay?
Well, we use like a zip tie, and we'll kind of secure it
Interesting.
onto the end of the nozzle. Yeah, or just like you kind of cut a hole in the sponge and you put it in there, and kind of like one of those. I guess picture like the big block sponge that you get at the hardware store. You kind of cut those down into smaller pieces, and we've got all kinds of different methods of doing that. Some people will use paintbrushes. If you can kind of put it and you just kind of, it all depends on how careful you need to be and precise. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Basal barking, same thing. Kind of what we just talked about. This is when you use herbicide mixed with an oil carrier. It's called Basal oil, and it's very sticky. It sticks to the bark, and this is a great way to kill an invasive shrub or tree without cutting it down. Many of the people probably watching this live in Will County, and Will County Forest Preserve does this quite a bit on some of their areas where they go through in the wintertime and they will basal bark treat the buckthorn, the honeysuckle, all the multiflora rose. And it's great because it kills it. It takes years, right? It kind of, or at least it kills it in that first year, but then it takes a long time for that woody material to die and break down. But then they'll go through and they'll do prescribed burns. And so over time, it's a great way to kind of remove all the invasives and with doing like the less with like it's the path of least resistance. You're not going out there driving heavy equipment on, you're not cutting all those things down, you're not disturbing the soil. It's a very good technique, and I think you're starting to see more people use it. And right here in this case, they're spraying, but a lot of times we'll use a sponge on the end of our nozzles, or like I said, this is perfect for using a paintbrush or a roller even, or just carefully getting that herbicide oil mixture onto the bark. If it's a large tree, kind of like this one, you want to get all the way around because you're effectively girdling that tree with chemical. That makes sense. Hand-wicking. So this is another way to apply herbicide. It's not the most fun. It's basically what you do is I like to wear several chemical gloves on like my left hand, and then you put a cotton glove over the hand with the chemical gloves on it, and then you actually apply some herbicide onto that cotton glove, and then you can wick the cattail and kill it that way. You know, it's not the most fun thing in the world to do. But it's very precise. It's a great way, like in this case, this person who's doing it to cattails, there's probably all kinds of good native aquatic vegetation underneath those cattails. So they know they can't go in there and spray because it would drip down and there'd be too much collateral damage. So it's a good way to selectively get the target species. And it's done quite regularly in our industry. There are some tools out there, so you don't have to use gloves in that kind of way, but a lot of the ones I've seen, they tend to drip and they're kind of messy. So it's still something that needs to evolve a little bit more, but it's a good technique. Mhm.
Is that what you have to use on Phragmites?
So when you have Phragmites and they have a big a big stand of them, you're going to go and you're just going to foliar spray that stand and it's going to die. But what happens is the following season, you're going to get some individuals coming up. And if you've got good vegetation, you'd be surprised how well, how many times, I can't tell you how many times I've gone and I've killed Phragmites. And then the next summer I come back and there's blue lobelia coming up and there's, like mud plantain and just, obedient plants showing up and some good things are showing up. But then you'll have these straggler Phragmites that are left. And so I'll go through and I'll hand wick those stragglers to kind of get those and let the other guys keep growing and take over. Yeah, let the good stuff come in. So it's not something you don't want to do a field that way, unless you really are, unless there was really good stuff underneath and you're trying to. But something like Phragmites, when they form their monocultures, there's nothing really growing underneath. It's really suppressing all that good stuff. Yeah. So now at this portion of the webinar, I'm going to start talking about some of the actual species that we're trying to control. Reed canary grass. This is the one I've already talked about a couple times in this presentation, but it's probably the worst invasive grass that we deal with in this area of the country. It tends to like wet areas, but it will grow upland anywhere really that it can. It's cool season. You can kind of see on this photo, especially the one on the right, that's what it looks like in flower. The one on the left is what it looks like when it's in seed. It kind of turns that oat color, and then they'll have like little black seeds on there. You really want to, unfortunately with this species, you kind of have to use herbicide to control it. There's not really too many, you can't mechanically, it's not going to really do anything to it. Phragmites, we just talked about this one. It's in the same category. You see it all the time along roadsides around here. Again, you're going to have to use herbicides to control it. This one, I typically, it's a warm season grass, so I'll treat it for the first time in July and then a second time in August if I'm trying to kill a large population of it. A lot of times people will burn them and prescribe burns, but fire alone is not going to control it. What's good about burning it if you're not doing any control methods, it is good to still burn it in a prescribed burn because it's dangerous fuel. If a wildfire were to break out and it catches those Phragmites on fire, you're going to have long, 20-foot flame lengths. So sometimes people, even if they're not doing ecological management of an area, they'll burn it just every few years. So that way the fuel load's safer and it's not going to, break out in a wildfire. But yeah, fire alone, not going to actually eradicate it. You're going to have to use herbicides to kill it. This is foxtail grass. You see it everywhere. It's not an invasive. It's an annual weedy grass. And you see it's got these big seed heads on top. This is something that it loves bare ground and just kind of moves in. So like if you were to drive over some bare soil, I wouldn't be surprised if you come back in a few months and you've got little foxtail grass starting to spring up. But it's one that we just kind of, when it's on a restoration site, we're just trying to cut it back and we're trying to keep it from producing more seeds. So that's something I wanted to talk about just because it's not something you have to herbicide and it's easily controlled and natives will push it out if they take hold. There's a ton more grasses in this area that we can, that we need to, that can become a problem. There's two types of cattails in aquatic situations that are problems. It's the narrow leaf cattail and the hybrid cattail. They'll form big monocultures just like Phragmites, reed canary grass. The native cattail in this area is a broadleaf cattail, and so it's it's Typha latifolia, which has got a much wider blade on it than the invasive cattails. Some of these other ones like smooth brome, quackgrass, orchard grass. These are all grasses that most of them came from Europe or Asia, and they're cool season. what's kind of nice about the ecosystem that we're working in is in Illinois, a lot of our prairie grasses and native grasses are more warm season grasses, things like switchgrass and big blue stem and Indian grass. Um, things that are like the elms, like Virginia wild rye and Canada wild rye, and those are cool season grasses that are native. For the most part, most of our native grasses are warm season. But our sedges on on the flip side are cool season, and those are native. But where I'm going with this is early in the spring, a lot of these cool season grasses come up and they're not native. And one characteristic that you see a lot of is they don't a lot of our native warm season grasses, they grow more in clumps, whereas the 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 cool season non-native grasses, they grow like turf grass does, where it just kind of spreads out and kind of forms thick mats. So it makes it a little bit easier to identify those versus our native grasses.
I have to say Kentucky bluegrass, isn't that what they put in a lot of seed mixes and even some of our sod?
Yeah, most of our grasses, yeah. And so, I have it listed as weedy, not invasive. It's just,
Yeah.
if you have that, like kind of like the guy I was talking about in Palatine, where, you have it in your native, in like your native plant beds, it can start to kind of choke things out or just, kind of crowd things out, especially because it's cool season. So it starts growing faster than some of your summer perennials. And that's why I put on this list. So it's something to be concerned about, but it's not going to take over the way it's not going to take over the way that reed canary grass is going to. That makes sense.
I
Gotcha.
even had reed canary grass pop up in some of my planter pots.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, that thing is aggressive.
Yes. It's probably one of the worst. Yeah. Um, I'm going to talk about some broadleaf weeds now and invasive species. Teasel, this is one you probably see all the time on the side of the roads. It's a perennial. It does do it forms a rosette its first year, and then it blooms the second year, but it will keep coming back, and it sets out a ton of seed. This is one that you're gonna have to. This is one that requires the use of herbicide to get under control. You'll see it where I've seen sites where it's basically a carpet of rosettes of Teasel. If it's been an area where it's been let loose for several years, it's very, very, very aggressive. So again, if you're not able to get to it early, you can always collect the seed heads and get those off the site just to kind of help things for the following year. But this is extremely aggressive.
So that looks like thistle, but it's not thistle. This is the thistle.
This is Canadian thistle. Yeah, Teasel, it looks a lot like thistle. I don't know if you can kind of see that picture on the left there. That veiny pattern on its leaves is very easy to identify. Those net leaf veins. So once you have an eye for it, you'll see those. You can identify it. And not only that, the green is very like almost neon green. The way it pops when you're walking, it's very easy to spot once you're familiar with this species. Canadian thistle. All right, it's yeah, another one that's really bad. So this is rhizonomous. It likes to spread by rhizomes. It'll fool you because you'll grab it and you'll pull it and you'll think you got the root, and like you'll get a good chunk of root with it and you'll pull it and it breaks off and you think you got it, but it's all connected underground and there's quite a bit of rhizomes and it's very hard to control without the use of herbicides. Again, everybody's got it in their yards, and if I'm doing a small site, I will just pull it and just kind of continue to manage it that way. But it's something that really, if it's a problem, you're probably looking at using herbicide to control it. And again, you want to spray it early when it's in the rosette stage. You don't want to wait till it's tall and flowering like this. At that point, you're probably looking at mowing it down and then treating it when it comes back.
So
If you
rosette
have-
stage for this is like what, June, or is it later?
Yeah, like May, June. Oh, you mean the stage when it's in flower or when it's when you
The
want to
stage when we should herbicide it.
Yeah, earlier, like May, June.
Okay.
Yeah, like when it's flowering like that, that's probably like end of June going into July, you know. Um, and this is again, it's kind of a cool season one where you'll get another shot at it in the fall too. So it's always good to do some fall stewardship. It's an opportunity to get some of these things again, especially if you
If
missed it.
if you're in a smaller yard and you have but you have a decent sized patch of this with all of those underground rhizomes, and so you're really fighting it, you pull it and you think you pulled it, but more comes up. Can you cut it back and then put plastic down?
Yes. Yeah, and that's something I probably should have said at the beginning. Plastic does work on these perennial weeds. So that is always an option. I think it might be a little bit of whack-a-mole, right? In this case, where like you would kill those, but then you might get some popping up in other locations. Um, because the plastic, I guess it's not really working in a systemic manner as the herbicide would, where it's going to
Right.
translocate through into the roots into the system. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's many other types of thistles too. I've got a slide that just kind of lists them later on, but Canadian thistle, this is a very prominent one in our area that, I think everybody watching probably knows this plant.
This is the one that you go to pull and you get all like the thorns or stickers that, yeah.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and speaking of stickers, burdock, this is one that it creates that spiky ball that sticks to everything like Velcro.
That's awful. It gets stuck on your pants.
Yeah.
Your hair, everything.
In your dog, because it's stuck on your dog's fur, and then you got to try and get it out. And
Yes.
but yeah, this is one. So this is actually a biennial. If it's in small doses, you can probably get away with just cutting it back and letting time, take care of it. But in many cases where it's been let go for several years, you're going to have that carpet kind of effect where the burdock is just really taking over, and it's going to take several. So you're looking at using some herbicide to control it if it's been left to its own devices for a long time. What's nice about it, it has that big broad leaf that's easy to treat without, collateral damage. You can kind of squirt some herbicide on those leaves and take care of them. Curly dock, okay, this is a very common, broadleaf weed in natural areas. It gets its name because it has those curly leaves, and you can see that's a rosette of what curly dock looks like in the spring. And then it kind of forms it gets these tall, big, kind of ugly flower heads. And when they go to seed, that photo there where it's red, that's what it looks like when it's gone to seed. So with this, if you can treat it early in the rosette stage, that's perfect. If it gets tall like that, this is one that you can rip out of the ground. It's got a taproot, but that taproot likes to come with it. But like even like that top photo, you got a big row of that. That's going to be a lot of work ripping all that stuff out. So in a case like that, you could just you could cut that stuff down, and then when it greens back up, those rosettes, you could spray them later on. And that way you're stopping it from setting seed, and then you're able to control it still. So these are all kinds of things to think about. If you let it get to that point where you got the red seeds on there, then you're looking at just cutting those stalks off and disposing them and getting them off the property. So
Most of these invasive plants are so ugly.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like wherever they came from, do they consider them attractive there?
I don't know about attractive, but like they're kept in check, and they don't so it's part of the landscape, right? So there are some that are pretty, like purple loosestrife has a very nice
Right.
purple flower, and that's part of the problem is because people would actually plant that on their property. But yeah, like this one, you're like, why would anybody, want this? But it's part of part of the landscape where it came from.
Somewhere in some country, this is like a treasured plant of their ecosystem, right? Because it's left in check and things co-evolve with it, but then it comes here and it just takes over.
Yeah, and there are some native species that are very similar to, again, the same family that are native to Illinois. And again, they get big and goofy looking, but they provide a lot of good habitat.
True.
And they're, part of the system. So, wild carrot, also called Queen Anne's lace, gets this name because it looks like a doily. We talked about this one already. I don't consider it invasive. I consider it more of a weed. But it does produce, especially see that top left photo. It really, when they start to turn brown like that, they produce a lot of seed, and they just get in there and they kind of mess up your garden, or they mess up the prairie a little bit. So it's something that I consider a weed, but what's nice about it, you can control it mechanically. You could take a machete or a brush cutter, cut it at the base. That usually kills it when it's in flower. Or you can pull it out of the ground just like curly dock, and that taproot that looks like a carrot comes right with it. So that's kind of the primary way to take care of this one. So here's sweet clover. This is what we talked about earlier. It gets very tall. You can kind of see the 3 clover leaves in that photo. So, well, I guess both photos got it. But when it gets to that stage and it's flowering like that, it's prime time to mow that, and you can take care of that pretty easily.
I get this coming up a lot in my front, and I'm just so thrilled to hear I don't have to get the root. As long as I get everything above ground, I can just go through like with the weed whacker and just get that, right?
Yeah, but you want to, like I said, you want to wait. You actually have to be a little patient and kind of wait till it gets to flower, because if you cut it early, it will shoot back up, if that makes sense. Yeah. You want it to kind of weaken itself by using all that energy to produce flower, then hit it. This is a terrible plant, crown vetch. It's also in the pea family, just like sweet clover. It really it forms these mounds that climb, and they kind of clog everything up, and they really just choke out the natives. They form these real thick monocultures.
Keith, many years ago, when I was a gardener, but I didn't know about native plants, I was at some garden center and they were selling this. And I planted it. Oh my God, the nightmare I had for a decade trying to eradicate this stuff.
Yeah, so traditionally they used to use it to prevent erosion. So they would actually use them along roadways and areas to prevent erosion. And it does a good job of that with like that mat that it forms. There's different types of vetches too. And what they do is they add a lot of nitrogen to the soil. So I was at some organic farm. This was a long time ago. And the farmer was actually using vetch. It wasn't crown vetch. It was a different type of species that he had. But he would actually he planted it in the fall because it was cool season. And he was basically using the nitrogen that it would produce for the soil. It's pretty interesting things. Yeah. So it has a few properties, and I could see that's maybe why they were selling it. But when it gets escaped into our natural areas, it just wreaks havoc. And really the only, your best way to control it is to use herbicides, unfortunately. If I was tackling that bottom photo, it's all in flower, it's kind of choked out. I would probably mow that first, right? Just kind of mow it down and then let it start to kind of resprout. And then I would carefully treat, stuff. And then hopefully maybe there's things that are getting choked that it would release, and you can kind of tell the difference. But that might be
I like it. You go out there, you look at that picture and you have a plan. I look at that picture and I'm like, oh my, I give up.
Well, there's a pretty good chance it might just be a redo, right? Yeah. That might be the only thing that's living there right now at this point, but yeah.
And Keith, when you mow things, do you pick up the pieces? Do you pick up the stuff that you've cut, or do you just kind of leave it in place, or does it depend?
It depends. If it's something that's so late in the season that I think it might, like you cut it and it might still seed out, then I will collect those. So like the Queen Anne's lace or things like that that are, or even the sweet clover, if it's like really kind of pushing the boundary. But if it's in flower and I'm timing it just right, I'm not going to clean it all up. Yeah, you might just mow that down. Something like this, you would probably run that over with like a tractor mower and you wouldn't clean that up. It would be all mulched up, you know? So, yeah. Oh, this is another terrible one. The Birdsfoot trefoil. It's the one with the yellow flower. That's another one that is in the pea family that is just a real nightmare to take control. It really gets in between everything when it gets into a prairie. So that's something that we have to herbicide. Oftentimes we'll do the same thing where if it's in flower like that, we'll cut it. We'll use like a string trimmer or something to kind of knock it down. And then when it comes back, we'll spray because this will be a smaller area. And then there's red clover and white clover. So that photo on the right, that's red clover. And that's one that you probably see in, your typical backyards. That's just your short, kind of garden flower. It is perennial. I've had pretty good luck in native areas where it pushes that stuff out, especially like native grasses will kind of push that out of the way. So I will kind of start with something like that. I will mechanically, hit that with a brush cutter. And then if it's a problem, I will carefully treat, patches of it, but it's not something that it's not as high on the priority as like the Birdsfoot trefoil or the crown vetch. If that makes sense.
So with this trend with people planting clover instead of lawns, are they planting red clover, white clover, or is it something that's less of a weed and has more value than these?
I'd have to see. I do think white clover gets planted a lot in that case. You know, so yeah, it's more of a weed they're planting, but I guess they're not. I wouldn't. Again, I'm not calling it an invasive like I am the other ones. It's more of a weed in that situation. Yeah.
Got it.
Garlic mustard, we already talked about. It pulls out of the ground real easily. This photo at the top, that's what it looks like in the first year. I don't recommend trying to spray that with herbicide the first year. And the reason being is it comes up at the same time as a lot of your spring ephemerals. And so it just would be too much of a nightmare to try and do that and not have collateral damage. So you are better off. I mean, if it's all by itself and you don't have anything near it, you could carefully treat some of that. But in my experience, it's better just to worry about it when it's in the second year when it's flowering and just yank it out and,
When
mechanically.
it's young like that on the ground, it reminds me of Creeping Charlie.
Looks a lot like Creeping Charlie. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ragweeds. I wanted to talk about ragweed because again, it's not an invasive species. It's an annual. So they get huge. Obviously, the pollen can create hay fever, in some people. So it's something that clients, obviously, nobody wants to look out and see 10-foot giant ragweed in their backyard. You just want to control it mechanically. You just want to cut that stuff down. It gets handled very well what am I trying to say? In natural areas, the natives do a pretty good job at keeping it out for the most part. And really, if you just go ahead and cut it down, it should not be a problem. It's not something as invasive as like reed canary grass. So yeah, I made another list. Like I could talk about, I could talk for days about all the different broadleaf weeds of concern. So I just kind of listed some out here for the people watching this presentation. Kind of towards the top were some of the more invasive things like poison hemlock, wild parsnip, purple loosestrife, spotted knapweed. Those are all really bad. And some of those actually are dangerous, right? Poison hemlock is something that you could have like a respiratory reaction to, and it could be fatal. So you definitely want to take care of that if it's on your property, and that's something that you would use herbicide on. Wild parsnip is another one that it has oils that if it gets on your skin and then sunlight hits those oils, you'll get blisters on your skin. So there's some
So
dangerous
this is a
stuff.
good, that's a good, I'm so glad you brought that up. So if somebody is doing this on their property, if they have a big wild area on their property and they're trying to handle some of this on their own, what is your recommendation of how to protect themselves? What should they be sure to wear? What should they, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, you should definitely be wearing long sleeves, long pants. You shouldn't be walking around in shorts out there with around this stuff. Yeah, that's just, wear a hat with like a big brim on it. Safety glasses. You're always wearing gloves when you're around these things. Um, when you're applying herbicides, you have to wear chemical gloves when you're working with those. Yeah, just kind of like everything should be covered when you're working out on your property with invasive species.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And so, yeah, I'm not going to read the whole list, but there's a lot here. And I tried to kind of, I'm trying to draw a line for people to understand that there is a difference between invasives and then there's weeds, right? And the invasives are the really big problems. The weeds are still a problem, but they're not as bad. And meaning that you kind of control the bad invasive species, then the weeds kind of move in. You kind of get those under control, and you replace with natives. That's kind of the cycle I'm trying to get, across. Buckthorn. This is probably one of our worst invasive
This
species.
is Lexi's favorite. How many did you have removed, Lexi?
Oh my gosh, I don't even know. I think maybe 20 came out and they were just horrible. They've been there forever. This is a new old house that I've moved into and nobody bothered to take them down. So it was time for them to go. And then Keith's gonna help me put in some really cool new native shrubs. So more on
Yes,
that to come. Yeah.
we're excited about that. Yeah, it's a great opportunity and such a good feeling to get that off your property. Um, there's two main types of buckthorn in this area that we deal with. It's the common buckthorn and then the glossy buckthorn. This photo with the red and blackberries on the bottom, that's glossy buckthorn. You can see the leaf looks a little bit different than the one to the right, which is the common buckthorn with the blackberries. The glossy tends to grow more towards wet areas. It has more of a purplish colored bark too. They do have thorns on them. When you cut the stems, there's usually it's kind of like a bright yellow color. So it's kind of nice after you can kind of see them. It's easier to treat those stumps after you cut them because they kind of stand out. But they create giant thickets throughout the whole area. Even my house, when I moved in, there was a hole along the fence, just a solid fence line of buckthorn that I had to cut down and remove. So again, another great opportunity though to use that basal bark method. You can get in there and you can carefully apply herbicide to the bark of these and let them die and then break down over time. That's always an option. Honeysuckle, that's the other big invasive shrub in this area. Has white flowers, red berries. Birds do eat the berries. That's so, it's kind of bizarre how we're creating habitat for birds, but then also birds do play a role in spreading some of the invasives. So they do, they will eat the berries and will spread honeysuckle, but it is an invasive species that just really will form thickets and they'll push out all your other native plants. And that's why we go after it. So again, you use all your traditional methods. You can cut it, treat the stumps. You could basal bark treat it. If they're small enough, you can foliar spray them. But it's definitely something you want to keep off your property if you can.
No matter how good it smells.
Yeah, yeah. No matter how good it smells and how nice the flowers are. Yeah. So yeah, I made a list of some more trees and shrubs of concern in our area. Stuff towards the top, like autumn olive, that's an invasive that really should be handled. Like multiflora rose. Oh, black locust, I wanted to talk about that. That's one that if you cut it, it actually stimulates more growth. So using herbicide is actually the preferred method. So doing a basal bark treatment to that. I've had that where you cut down one big black locust, and then all of a sudden little guys are popping up all over the place. It kind of sends out a message to sprout out like clones everywhere. And then a lot of below that, a lot of these other trees are what what we consider weedy. So stuff like mulberry, I think everybody's got a mulberry in their yard. They just show up everywhere. Um, barberry, burning bush, Siberian elm, all those things. Yeah, they're weedy. They're not necessarily great for your property. And then stuff like box elder is native, but it can be aggressive. So, keep it in check. And some of these other ones.
So can I ask you, like, a lot of people love the look of sumac, and sumac can be aggressive, but what do you think about it? Are you opposed to sumac on a large acreage property?
No, not at all. I'm not opposed to sumac at all. Like it's native. It's just one that tends to sometimes dominate an area. And so we will, if anything, we'll just kind of corral it a little bit.
Mhm.
But it's native. So yeah, it's one that it's one that I'm not, it's definitely not a high priority by any means, but it's one that in this industry we've had to at times just kind of corral it, keep it in check. And same with dogwoods. Dogwoods are great, the native ones, but they can take over an area, and we sometimes will kind of clean those up. Yeah.
Now, if people are looking at home, so like some of those, like I have like the app on my phone, Picture This. I'm assuming it'll show all these and all these invasive species. You can, if people are trying to like decipher what they have going on at home, those apps will also include these types of invasive species as well, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Those apps are great.
And will they tell people whether it's annual or perennial, so they kind of know, should I pull this or do I need more help here?
Yeah, so they will definitely tell you if it's perennial or annual. I mean, sometimes the apps get it wrong, or they're, maybe they don't get the exact species, but they kind of get you in the ballpark a lot of times. But they've come a long way. They didn't really exist when I started doing this work, and now I even use Picture This too sometimes if it's if I'm getting a little confused. But yeah, I think it's great now that homeowners have that they have it at their disposal. Mhm. And even I think you can take photos now with your phone and do like a Google image search, and that works really well too.
Okay.
At least for IDing the plant.
What did we do before that?
Yeah, we had to read.
Like so hard to imagine.
Well, I've got a library of books. Yeah, I had to read all
Yeah.
these books, and I had to go to night school, and like learn all yeah.
Look at all those years you spent in school when now you just need the app.
Um, yeah, and then I wanted to talk about vines. For a lot of our vines, the preferred method, if you're able to, is to kind of cut the vine at the base and kind of remove it, and then just dab that little stump with herbicide if you're able to. Sometimes it's such a mess, you may not be able to do that. Sometimes you can, it makes sense to foliar your treat, but yeah, the ones that we really have that are in this area that are invasive are, like Oriental bittersweet, kudzu. I think a minor, that's something that people use. They use that all the time as a ground cover, on their properties. But if it gets out into a natural area, it can really be a problem. Same with goutweed, euonymus, grapevines. Those can get really big and even choke out trees. Bindweed, that one's a real pain in the butt. That's the one in the middle photo on the bottom. That likes to just kind of choke out things, kind of climb up your plants. when I encounter that, that's typically what I do is I kind of pull it off plants to kind of rescue them. And then I try to trace it down to where the stump is and then just carefully dab it with herbicide.
Well, I get that. So that's bindweed. I was always thinking that was some kind of a like a holly.
Morning glory.
Morning glory, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, morning glory is kind of one of the names for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and with that flower, yeah, that is one of the common names, but it's yeah. Mhm.
I had that so entwined back in the day when I had clematises lining a fence. I had that so entwined with the clematises, there was just, I couldn't get rid of it.
Mhm.
I ended up taking everything out, including the clematises. There was like no other way.
To get to it, yeah. It's unfortunate, and again, it's still not technically an invasive. It's more of a weed, you know. Like Oriental bittersweet is way worse than that. Like that'll just completely run wild and just start choking things out. And then I wanted to talk about poison ivy. Poison ivy is actually native. I think like close to like 50 different species of birds will actually eat some of the berries on it and things. So um, but a lot of property owners, you know, they don't want it on their property. So it's something that gets, you know, managed in cases. But again, it's not invasive. I just wanted to kind of clear that up, that it is a native vine. So yeah, we kind of went through a lot of the tools in the tool shed when it comes to doing stewardship. And we talked about quite a few species. There's tons more that we didn't talk about. But I wanted to kind of go over just a few concepts that I'm trying to get across. So like I mentioned, annual weeds and most biennial weeds can be controlled mechanically. You know, that was a big theme of here is that, you know, there's that saying, if the only tool in your tool shed is a hammer, after a while, everything looks like a nail. And what I don't want is I don't want people, if they're using herbicides, to start, you know, getting in that habit of, okay, we're spraying wreak canary grass. Oh, there's a ragweed. I'm going to spray that too. I'm going to spray, you know, that sweet clover. And then before you know it, you're spraying all these things, and you know, the site's taking a step backwards. So I really want to get that point across that for annuals and most biennials, you can get controls mechanically. When you mow weeds, especially in their flower, you can prevent them from producing seeds. Sometimes that is your best your best tactic. Like I mentioned earlier, especially on a newly seeded site, we're trying to keep those mowed just to keep all those weeds from seeding out and making the situation worse. One thing you should remember is when we're cutting down the flowers of the invasives or the weeds, we're also letting our natives go to seed. And we want that, we're encouraging them to put out more seed and to fill in the bare areas. So it's amazing how some selective mowing can really help the progress of a natural area. Want to emphasize that herbicides are an important tool for controlling perennial weeds, and especially aggressive invasive species. But it is just a tool, you know, and it needs to be used appropriately. If you're going to use herbicides, try to use ones that are selective to the type of plant that you're treating. Use selective over non-selective whenever possible. After you remove invasive species from a site, it's common for annual weeds to populate the open space. Okay. So installing native plants and then continuing the maintenance cycle is important to kind of tip that scale. So it's kind of, there's that progression. It's like you've got the really bad invasives, you get rid of those. Then now you've got the annual weeds and, you know, that kind of move in, and then you get your natives established, and then you're trying to tip that scale of getting more and more natives in there, and you're pushing out the annual weeds and the less aggressive weeds over time. Okay. And any of those nasty ones, if they do show up in small doses, just want to keep your foot on the gas with those. And yeah, the time of year often dictates the most important stewardship activity at that point in time. So like I said, depending on what time of the year you're at, what stage they're in, you know, that's going to determine what's the biggest priority for that day. So And then, yeah, that's kind of the end. So that we're gonna get to the Q&A, which is gonna be probably the best part, I can
Oh,
answer all.
yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, if you have any questions, you can always email me, Keith at Stellar Natives, and check out my website. So,
Awesome. Well, we do have lots of questions in the chat, Keith. So let me try to run down the list here. Okay, this one comes from Andy. Removing buckthorn can involve cutting it high and weakening the roots and then pushing it out of the ground the second year. Do you have any experience with this?
yeah, that kind of sounds almost like they're girdling in a way, right? Like they've cut it, and then like letting it kind of die in place and then kick. Yeah, if they can if you can successfully do that and it does weaken it and you can get that ripped out, then that's nice. You don't have to use herbicides. You can get that. Yeah, buckthorn is interesting. Yeah, there will be. Oftentimes it's weird. It almost crowds each other out sometimes. It's kind of bizarre where I'll be clearing the bigger buckthorns and there'll be like standing dead ones next to them. It's kind of bizarre how that is. Yeah, and you can almost kick those over, like you said. But yeah.
Yeah, that was my situation, that a lot of them were like kind of dead and then there were big ones growing over them. So they just look crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, this question, I have many invasives I am trying to remove. The most difficult is a huge drift of Vinca major in a wooded area of oaks, tulip trees, and pines along a stream. What is the safest way to get rid of it?
Yeah, so that's that Vinca. That's that escaped ground cover. Yeah, it's kind of what I was talking about earlier with those vines. It was in that slide is if you can kind of yank it up and kind of trace it to its origins as best as possible, um, and then cut it and then carefully dab it with herbicide, that's a really good way to do that. That's gonna be a tough one because it comes up early. It's like it gets green early in the season. If you have ephemerals and good things, mixed in with it, you can't just go in there and foliar spray with herbicide. So that's something, yeah, you may have to do a little bit of. It's one where you have to combine two methods. You got to combine some mechanical of kind of getting, just yanking out some of it, and then also a little bit of chemical. And
And
that's
since she's on a stream, do you have to use those aquatic safe herbicides?
you do, yeah. Yeah, there is an aquatic safe one that works good on vines. It's a Tricopure product that we use, and that's safe to use. Again, I recommend hiring a professional that's licensed and knows what they're doing. Just because, yeah, you want to make sure that they're using something that's proper for that situation and they're going at the right proper rates and everything. So.
Okay, we have another question about I have a vine called devil's vine that climbs trees and kills them. Do we know what that devil's vine might be a common name for?
Hmm. I don't know. I don't know the name Devil's Vine, but I mean, a lot of vines have that characteristic where they'll climb and then they'll choke things out. Like kudzu was one that we talked
Yeah,
about.
I was thinking maybe it's the kudzu.
Yeah. Um,
You
again,
ever see some of those pictures of like kudzu vine that's like literally taking over forests? Like everything is just covered with that vine.
I've seen those, and I've actually saw my wife sent me this video that was really cool the other day, where it was almost like they had like an excavator that had like a spin, like a like a claw that spun, and they like stuck it in there and they spun it and it like sucked it all up, like all this kudzu,
Really?
like wrapped it around like something getting caught in like the blades of a ceiling fan or something, it just like spun it up and they ripped it out. It was pretty impressive. But
That
yeah,
would be fun, right? Get
yeah,
rid of all that kudzu vine.
it was a great video. But that's kind of, again, with these vines, yeah, you're looking at probably cutting them mechanically and just stopping them from choking things out and then carefully dabbing them with herbicide. You
So
know,
when I look up devil's vine, I find golden pothos,
hmm,
devil's ivy.
devil's ivy.
So
Huh.
I don't know what the devil's vine is referring to. Pothos, well, that's pothos growing behind me right here.
Oh. So, um, Yeah, I don't know. That doesn't sound like one that I've encountered too much, but it definitely sounds like a problem, and that needs to be, yeah, kind of that combination of mechanical and chemical.
Save the poor tree.
Yeah.
This one's
Try one of those
interesting.
apps on your phone. Try picture this and take a picture of it and maybe you'll get the scientific name.
Yeah, good idea, Kathy. Okay, this one, we are slowly working on turning a previously mowed field into a meadow-esque planting. This spring we plan to burn in order to stamp back the cool season grasses. Is that a good idea? We also need to get rid of all the leaves that accumulate on the field, so we thought burning would handle both issues.
Okay, so they're getting rid of the cool season grass and they want to put a prairie in.
Yes.
So the burn's going to be great for removing the vegetation. It's gonna basically prep the area for seed, which is great. Like nothing's better than burning off a field and then putting the seed down because you got that perfect, the soil is exposed, you've got great contact. That's a great way to approach it. The cool season grass though needs to be controlled before you burn it, if that makes sense. Um, if the, so if it was all cool season grass and then it wasn't sprayed or killed off, and then they go and they burn it because when you do the prescribed burns, you're kind of doing it before the season starts. And so that cool season grass is still like brown, if that makes sense. So they're gonna burn that off and then all that grass will be gone and you'll be down to bare soil. But the problem is you put your seed down now in the spring come May, all that cool season grass is going to come right back. And now it's going to be a big problem because it's going to be choking out all your seedlings. So the fire is great for soil prep, but it's not great for control is my answer to that question.
What would you
Okay.
recommend in that situation?
If you're just getting rid of it and you're going and you're starting over with a seed mix, then I would use herbicide and kill it off. Like wipe the slate clean. That's how we do it. And especially whenever I'm converting like turf grass to a prairie, that turf grass has been maintained over years, right? They've been mowing it. They've kept the broadleaf weeds out. If you kill off that turf grass and then put it in your seed mix, you're going to have really good results typically. It's way easier than if somebody had a field of teasel for 10 years, right? You're going to have to treat that with herbicide a few times. You're going to have to really just keep fighting that, but you got to get that under control first. Because otherwise all that stuff's going to come back up and it's going to kind of ruin your seeding, unfortunately.
Burning doesn't get the roots.
No. Yeah.
Okay, greenbrier, is that a shrub or is that a tree?
Greenbrier, green, I, uh, g- see, the problem with common names is that there's multiples. Like the greenbrier that I'm thinking of is a native vine that, that grows that actually has a pretty good, high value and deer like to eat. It has a really cool, like looking fruit that it produces that deer like to eat. So that's the greenbrier that I'm thinking of.
He
Yeah,
says it's greenbrier with many thorns in the woods adjacent to my home. So maybe that is a native.
greenbrier. There's gooseberry is a native shrub with a lot of thorns that's green. It's
Do
possible
you live in the Chicago area or what part of the country are you in?
I'm not sure. We don't know if they're still online, so I'm not
Oh,
sure we're
okay.
gonna get an answer. But
Okay.
yeah, that question came from Chris if you're still online.
Okay, well he could email me too if he wants and like a photo or yeah, I can help him out offline. Yeah.
Okay. And it sounds like a lot of people have problems with honeysuckle. So could you just talk through the ways to remove that one more time?
Yeah, so cutting it and then also treating the stumps with herbicide is very important. That's like kind of the traditional way of doing it. If you have a lot of patience and you're not in a rush and you want it to just kind of die over time, using that basal bark method is great, right? Because you kill it with you kill it with the herbicide, and then you let it basically die and kind of break down over time. And then foliar treating, if it's really small ones, you can you can dab those. But yeah, you're gonna have to involve some herbicide with honeysuckle, unfortunately. Yeah, whether you're treating the stump or you're treating the plant. I don't recommend. I'm not saying like a large shrub, go up and start spraying it, hosing it down with herb. Don't do that. That's a big mess. That's not what I'm saying. Do it carefully with the, either treating the bark or the stumps, or like little tiny seedlings, just spraying. So you could also girdle. I'm sorry, that's another option with a chainsaw, where you basically are cutting like a circle around the base of the shrub. And what that's going to do, that's going to prevent the xylem and phloem from, moving the sap up and down, and it's basically getting us to starve to death, and die. So that's an option too.
Okay, so we will just close with some funny comments. These are hilarious. So depressing when, as an adult, you realize that all the plants you associated with visiting family in the country and wild areas are actually invasives.
How about it?
Yeah, there might be some of the people watching this. It might be difficult now when you're driving on the expressway and you look over and everything you see is something that I talked about. It's like all you see is Teasel or Phragmites, or and you're like, ah. I mean, it definitely, once I've started learning all these things, it really kind of ruined a lot of my drives in the country. Yeah, because all you see is junk. You see buckthorn everywhere, and yeah.
Which is all the more important, that we actually remove these things from our properties, because that's the only area that we actually have control over. And so, if we can remove them and prevent them to spreading to other wild areas and then replace them with the natives, at least that's a step in the right direction. And if we try to help our neighbors, get to thinking the same way, we're all making a step in the right direction. So yeah, any other thoughts on that, Keith or Kathy?
I was just going to say that our natural spaces are in many cases so overwhelmingly infested with invasives that that's where our smaller properties, our smaller yards that we can, small by comparison, that we can create good, more controllable habitat. They can be such that can be such a help to our overall ecosystem, because we do have these small parcels that each one of us can maintain. When you're looking at the big country or the big wild, that's almost like, I mean, I don't like to feel like this, but I mean, I'm sure Keith wouldn't feel like this, but I look at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's too far gone. But I mean, I suppose you don't think that, Keith, but I would be like, oh, I can't, what do
No,
you do here?
yeah, it is very overwhelming, right? Like, yeah. I mean, it is nice working on a smaller site sometimes, because it's just, you can get it to, you can really get it under control, and it's rewarding. And I like what you're saying, is that if more people have this mentality and learn how to maintain these things, it's good for everybody.
If everybody's just maintaining one yard, but then you start adding up those yards and it becomes more of a controllable, huge habitat that then starts to evolve.
And what I would say is, when you go and you do something like, say you do clear out that big section of buckthorn on your property, or it's really important that you continue the maintenance over the years, right? It's one of those things where it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So you really want to be, even sites that are in excellent shape that we maintain, it's still great to do those touch-up visits every year. Go out there a couple times and just take care of what's, the issues, because you never want to like just let up, and like, because unfortunately, if nobody's doing the maintenance, it will start to regress back to where it was. So it's unfortunate that we're in that situation, but maintenance can get a little bit easier over time especially when you get a good, healthy, variety of natives established.
And just one last question. This is great. Is anything being done on a higher level to remove invasives, like state programs or something? Yeah, is that like what's being done with the forest preserves or on a larger scale? What's being done to prevent invasives?
Yeah, I'm actually always impressed that I think there were newer laws passed even in Illinois, I believe, with banning certain invasive species. Because for like a long time you could buy purple loosestrife at garden center. So there are a lot of organizations that are actively working to get laws passed and certain species banned. Transporting, yeah, a lot of those things have happened. And then we're also seeing a lot more laws getting passed where they're promoting native species, right? Where you can't, your homeowner association can't ban you from having native plants in your property. And so we're seeing things on that side, which is good because, in a way you could almost, I don't want to say in a way you could almost like make the argument that turf grass is such a dangerous, plants in our environment because of all the inputs it takes and to maintain and all the things that it replaced and all that stuff. So yeah, it's good to see that there are laws that are preventing some of these things from
And the forest preserve districts, at least around here, most of the forest preserve districts are actively always doing restoration work, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're constantly doing the work, and then they're also putting out contracts for people like me to do the work as well. So
Awesome. Well, that is the
Speaking of
end of our
which,
Q&A.
Mr. Sykora, what if people are interested in your services? What kind of services can you provide?
yeah, we do well, stewardship is one of our, it's kind of our bread and butter is doing the maintenance on these natural areas because they are sophisticated and it takes somebody who knows how to do this type of work. So we do stewardship services, we do landscape installation services. We'll come out, we'll actually design for you, you know, a new landscape, we'll install it, we will maintain it. And then, yeah, we grow native plants as well. And we use a lot of those in our installations. And I am open to doing some consulting too. If you need to, if you just want like an expert to kind of take a look at your area and give you some pointers, we can do some consulting for you. Mhm.
And what size properties will you work on from what is the smallest size property to the largest size property that you would work with?
Yeah, there really is no job too small. Like I'll do a little garden bed for somebody, I'm not afraid to do that and take that on and help them out. And then, yeah, I have quite a few customers where they're kind of in that, up to 5 acre size is kind of, I do quite a bit of. If someone's got a very massive property, I'll definitely take a look at it. And if it's too much for my company to handle, I can refer them or, we can make it happen. We can, yeah, take it on if we decide to, and we'll come up with a solution for it. So.
And what is your service area?
Yeah, it's basically the Chicago suburbs is where I work mostly, and I don't limit myself to like DuPage County or anything. I mean, I'm based in DuPage County, but I will go down to, I've got customers now down in Will County out in your area. I kind of stay out of the city for the most part. I don't, there's a lot of companies.
Traffic?
Yeah, with the traffic and all that, I'm more based out in the burbs here.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would say the Chicago suburbs is kind of my service area. Mhm.
Now, will you provide any consulting services or design services remotely? Is that anything that you do? Like if somebody just had questions and they reached out to you, but they're not from around the area, or if they wanted maybe a design created, could they do that remotely with you via like pictures or videos?
Maybe, but it's hard. I definitely am somebody, I like to get out there and look at the property, you know.
Okay,
Reading the landscape is a big part of what I do. I really need to see kind of like what's going on, and it's good to, but yeah.
understandable.
Mhm.
So everybody can see the best places the best way to contact Keith if you are interested is at his website, stellarnatives.com, or contact him through the website. Keith, his
My email.
email address is keith@stellarnatives.com. And Keith will be back with us in a few weeks in March to talk about, what's the name of that presentation, Lexi? Do you have it handy?
The best native plants for the home landscape.
Awesome.
Yeah,
And
don't
Keith
forget,
has also designed our garden packages for our upcoming native plant sale. So we've got a lot to talk about in the upcoming weeks.
we do, yes. I'm looking forward to that webinar. It should be fun. That one is going to be designed, you know, I'm really native plants that you can easily incorporate into your landscape that aren't going to be too aggressive, that, you know, can kind of function almost as landscaping plants. That's what we're going to talk about in that one. So,
They could be in your front yard as well as your back.
yeah.
And that one we get to talk about nice plants. Today we had to talk about icky plants.
Yes, I had to talk about things that nobody wants to talk about. Yeah,
Thank you so much, Keith. This was so helpful.
no problem. Thank you. Appreciate it.
See you in March.
Okay, we'll see you then.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.